welcome to the next edition of the Briefings Direct Voice of the Innovator podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on the latest insights into hybrid cloud and composability strategies. Openness, flexibility, and speed to distributed deployments have been the top drivers of the steady growth of container-based solutions. IT operators are now looking to increased automation, built-in intelligence, and robust management as they seek to take advantage of container-enabled hybrid cloud and multi-cloud approaches for both data and workloads. Stay with us now as we examine the rapidly evolving containers innovation landscape. Here to help us learn more about the next chapter of automated and extensible IT infrastructure solutions is Mark Linesch, Vice President, Technology Strategy in the CTO office and Hewlett-Packard Labs at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, thanks, Dana. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you. Let's look at the sort of state of the industry around containers. What do you see now as the top drivers for the use of containers now that it's matured a little bit?
Well, that's a great question. I think, the history of computing as far back as I can remember has been about abstraction, right? Abstraction of the infrastructure and then a separation of concern between the infrastructure and the applications. And, it used to be it was all bare metal, and then we, about a decade ago, went on the journey to virtualization. And virtualization was great. It's an abstraction that allows for a certain amount of agility, but it's fairly expensive because you're virtualizing the entire infrastructure, if you will, and you're dragging along a unique OS each time you do that. And so, the industry for the last few years has been saying, well, what's next? What's after virtualization? And clearly things like containerization are starting to really kind of catch hold. Why now? Well, because we're living in a hybrid cloud world. We're not just living in a hybrid cloud world, but we're moving pretty aggressively toward a more distributed edge-to-cloud world. And so we're going to be computing and analyzing and driving intelligence in all of our edges and all of our clouds. And so things like performance and developer-aware capabilities, DevOps, the ability to run an application in a private cloud and then change your mind and move that to a public cloud, or being able to drive applications to edge environments on a factory floor or in a harsh environment. These are all aspects of this new distributed computing environment that we're entering into, this hybrid estate, if you will. And what containers really do is they really have advantages for a lot of different constituents in this hybrid cloud world. First and foremost would be the developers. You think about development and developers in general, they've moved from, sort of the old kind of, monolithic and waterfall oriented to much more agile and continuous integration, continuous delivery. And what containers do for developers is they give them the ability to create a very predictable environment where they can couple not only the application, but the application dependencies, the libraries, and all that I need to run that application throughout the DevOps cycle. So from development through test, through kind of production and delivery, what containers do, because they carry and encapsulate all of those requirements, then I can fundamentally develop it, run it, test it, scale it, and all kinds of things. Unlike either bare metal and virtualization, where as I moved through that DevOps cycle, I had to worry about the OS dependencies and the type of platforms I was running that pipeline on. And so one of the key things for developers is that I can package my application, all the dependencies together into a distinct manifest. It can be version controlled and can be easily replicated. And so I can really debug, diagnose in different environments and save an enormous amount of time. So developers are the first beneficiaries, if you will, of this maturing containerized environment. The next is the IT ops folks, because they've got a now good separation of concern. They don't have to worry about kind of reconfiguring and patching and all these kinds of things. when they get a handoff from developers into a production environment. That capability is fundamentally encapsulated for them, and so they've got an easier time operating. And increasingly in this more hybrid distributed edge to cloud world, I can run those containers really virtually anywhere. So I can run them at the edge, I can run them in a public cloud, I can run them in a private cloud, and I can move those applications quickly without all of these prior dependencies that virtualization or bare metal required me to do. It contains an entire runtime environment, an application plus all the dependencies, all the libraries and the like. The third really area that's interesting is for the isolation. Containers are they virtualize the CPU, they virtualize memory, storage, network resources, but they do that at the OS level, and so they use resources much more efficiently for that reason. Unlike virtualization, which includes your entire operating system as well as the application, containers run on a single operating system. Each container shares the operating system kernel with other containers, so it's more lightweight, it uses much fewer resources, and it spins up almost instantly. So it spins up very, very quickly in seconds almost versus, let's say, a virtualization or a VM farm that would spin up in minutes. And so you think about this fast-paced, this DevOps world that we live in, this hybrid estate that we live in, which is increasingly a distributed hybrid estate from the many edges and many clouds that we're trying to compute and analyze data around. And that's why containers are really showing quite a bit of popularity right now. Is because of the business benefits, the technical benefits, the development benefits, the operation benefits.
It's been fascinating to me to see that the portability has been a newer aspect of that fit-for-purpose benefits and being able to pass along a continuum in development. But one of the things that we saw with virtualization, Mark, was that too much of a good thing spun out of control, that there was sprawl, lack of insight and management, and eventually waste. How do we head that off with containers? How do containers become manageable when you're going across that entire continuum?
Well, a couple of things. I think one is standardizing the actual container formats, and that's been coming along fairly nicely. I think there's an initiative called the Open Container Initiative that is part of the Linux Foundation and really develops the industry standards so that these containers, number one, and the formats and the runtime software associated with them are standardized across the different platforms. That helps a lot. Number two, then, is a standard deployment option, and the one that seems to be gripping the industry right now is Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an open source capability. It provides mechanisms for deploying, for maintaining, for scaling containerized applications. And the combination of those standard formats from a runtime perspective, the ability to manage that with these capabilities like Mesosphere or Kubernetes has really provided then the tooling and the capabilities to move this forward.
And the timing couldn't be better because as people are now focused on as a service for so much, whether it's an application, even infrastructure, and increasingly entire runtime environments and even data centers, we're thinking about the services and the business benefits and not the underlying technology. And no one really cares whether it's running in a virtualized environment or on bare metal or in a container as long as you're getting the business benefits. So what are some of the chief business benefits in addition to these technical benefits that you've discussed when it comes to containerization?
Well, you mentioned that nobody really cares what they're running on, and I would postulate that they shouldn't care. In other words, that developers should develop or IT ops should operate, and fundamentally, I guess the first kind of business benefit is the enormous agility that developers get and that IT ops get in utilizing these standard containerized environments. And not only do they get sort of an operations benefit, faster development, lower cost to operate, and those types of things. But they take a lot less resources. Containers, because of their shared and abstracted environment, really take a lot more or they take a lot fewer resources out of a server and storage complex, out of a cluster, so you can run your applications faster with less resources, lower cost, and those types of things. And you can also spin up those containers, and this is very important when you're thinking about composition and composability in general, because the combination of containerized environments with things like composable infrastructure says that I've got the flexibility, the agility to really meet the needs of my customers in a very time-sensitive and very, very agile way.
And how are we seeing organizations, IT operators in particular, making composability and containerization a tag team, a whole greater than the sum of the parts? How do you see these two things being used in practical terms with sort of an innovative bent to it?
Well, I think one of the things that I've done in the past is I've managed some of our R&D centers, and these are usually 50,000 square foot data centers where all of our developers and firmware and software writers are off doing great work and signing code and doing those kinds of things. And one of the interesting things that we did a few years ago, we were fully virtualized kind of private cloud environment, so we could deliver infrastructure as a service to these developers. But as hybrid hit and becomes more and more a mature and known pattern, if you will, our developers were saying, well, look, I need to spin this stuff up more quickly. I need to be able to run through my dev test pipeline more effectively. And containers as a service was just a super hit for these guys because they're under pressure every day to develop, build, and run these applications with the right security, the right portability, the right performance, the stability that's required. And the containerized systems, the notion of being able to quickly spin up a container, do work, package that, and move it through their pipelines becomes very, very important. From an infrastructure ops perspective, it's a perfect marriage, if you will, between the developers and the operators, because the operators can use composition and things like our Synergy platform or our OneView tooling to quickly build a set of templates, a set of container images, and really allow those developers to populate that container as a service infrastructure with the work that they do and do that very quickly.
One of the hot topics of the day is understanding better how a continuum will evolve between the edge deployments and a core or cloud or hybrid cloud environment. And how do containers perhaps help in that regard? How is there a core to cloud or core cloud to edge benefit when containers are being used?
Well, I mentioned in passing that we're moving back into a much more distributed computing environment where we're going to be injecting intelligence and processing through all of our places, people, and things. And so when you think about that type of an environment, you're sort of saying, well, I'm going to develop an application. That application may require more microservices or more modular architecture. It may require that I have some machine learning or some deep learning analytics as part of that application, and it may then need to be provisioned to 40 or 400 different sites from a geographic perspective. And so when you think about this notion of edge to cloud, you might have a set of factories in different parts of, let's say, the United States. Let's say you have 10 factories, and I'm trying to do inferencing and actions on some type of an industrial process. It might be video cameras attached an assembly line looking for defects and ingesting data and then analyzing that data right there and then taking some type of a remediation action. And so as we think about this edge to cloud dance, one of the things that's critical there is continuous integration, continuous delivery, being able to develop these applications and the AI models associated with analyzing the data on an ongoing basis. AI models, quite frankly, drift, and they need to be updated periodically. And so continuous integration, continuous delivery types of methodologies are becoming very important. Then how do I package up all of those application bits and analytics bits and machine learning bits How do I provision that to those 10 factories, and how do I do that in a very fast and fluid way? And that's where containers really shine, because they'll give you bare metal performance. They are a packaged, portable capability that really lends itself to the fast-paced delivery and delivery cycles that are required for kind of these intelligent edge and IoT applications.
Yeah, we've heard an awful lot about AI ops and injecting more intelligence into more aspects of IT infrastructure, particularly at the recent HPE Discover conference. But we seem to be focusing a lot on the gathering of the data and the analysis of the data, and not so much on the what do you do with that analysis? So the execution on the inferences and on the suggestions. It seems to me that containers is very strong when it comes to being able to take a recommendation from an AI engine and then doing something with it to deploy, to migrate, to port. So am I off on some rough tangent, or is there something about containers and being able to execute on what the intelligence provides that might be also a benefit?
Well, I think, again, at the edge, you're talking about many applications where there's a large amount of data that needs to be ingested. It needs to be analyzed and then taken a real-time action from a predictive maintenance or from a classification or a remediation perspective. And so containers spin up very quickly. They use very few resources. And so the whole cycle time, if you will, of ingesting data, analyzing that data through a container framework, taking some action back to the thing that you're analyzing, is just made a whole lot easier and a whole lot performant with less resources when you're using containers. Now, virtualization still have a very solid set of constituents, both at the hybrid cloud and at the intelligent edge, but we're seeing the benefits of containers really shine in these more distributed edge to cloud environments.
And Mark, we've chunked this out a little bit among the developer to DevOps to operations and deployment, and we've talked about the edge and cloud. But what about chunking it out in terms of the type of IT organization? So is there a benefit for containerization at an SMB level or a shop where there's only a handful of people and they're resource constrained when it comes to labor and skills? Is there a people, skills, talent side of this that we haven't yet tapped into?
Well, there definitely is. I mean, I think that one of the things that we do at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, of course, is that we're trying to help customers move into these new development models, these new abstraction models like containers, like DevOps, like continuous integration and delivery. And so we offer a set of kind of services, if you will, to help customers, whether they're medium-sized customers, large customers, to think differently about development of applications. No more monolithic, much more agile, much more microservice-oriented. Microservice-oriented development really lends itself to this idea of containers and the ability of those containers to interact with each other as a full set application. And so I think what you see happening is that containers really are something that you almost have to have a reason not to use containers now. That's pretty exciting, quite frankly, because I think that it gives us an opportunity to really help customers to engage from an education perspective, from a consulting, from an integration, from a support perspective, as they kind of journey through the microservices and how to re-architect their applications, as they journey through how they move to a more CI/CD type of an approach, and then how they manage and operate these types of environments with high automation and low operation costs.
Yes, and a lot of the innovation that we're starting to see along the lines of digital transformation at a business level, we're seeing more of these sort of aggregate business processes and applications where they're taking services and microservices from different deployment models altogether, sometimes multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, SaaS services, on-premises, bare metal databases, and so forth. Are you seeing innovation percolating in any way? Are we getting ahead of the market, or do you actually see some of these aggregate microservices, mixed services, apps, and processes coming to fruition? And if you have any examples, I would love to hear them.
Well, I think that I am seeing that. You see that every day when you look at the internet, right? It's really a collaboration of different services kind of based on APIs, and you collect a set of services for a variety of different things from around these internet endpoints, and that's really as a service. That's what that's all about, is the ability to think of all your applications as service endpoints, if you will, or collections of service endpoints that you can orchestrate together. And beyond kind of containers is this new function-based or serverless type of computing, which basically says, hey, I want to consume a service from someplace, from an HTTP endpoint, and I want to do that, very quickly and very effectively using some of the service-oriented methodologies and this notion of containers. And so I think we're seeing a lot of innovation in things like these functions as a service capabilities that some of the public cloud providers are now providing. We're seeing a lot of innovation in just the overall operations at scale of these hybrid cloud environments, given the portability of containers. And so I think in general, what we believe is that, cloud isn't a place, it's an experience. And the utilization of containers is just a great experience both for the development community and for the IT ops community that is out there trying to support the business objectives of the company.
And Mark, for you personally, as you're looking for technology, strategy, innovations, how do you approach innovation? Is this something that comes organically, that sort of bubbles up, or is there a solid process or workflow that gets you to innovation? How do you foster innovation in your own particular way that works?
Well, at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we really have kind of three big levers that we're pulling on when we think about innovation. First is, we can do a lot of organic development, and that's very important. And that really involves kind of understanding where we think the industry's going and trying to get ahead of that, and then proving that out with proof of concepts and kind of incubation kinds of opportunities with lead customers. We also, of course, have a lever around inorganic innovation. You saw recently an acquisition by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise of Cray to really kind of turbocharge this next generation of high-performance computing and really sort of drive that next generation of exascale computing. And then the third area is really our partnerships and investments. And we have deep collaborations with companies like Docker, for instance, and they've been a great partner for a number of years, and we've quite frankly helped to mature some of that technology. We're an active member of the standards organizations around containers. And so being able to mature the technology with partners like Docker to be able to really kind of get at the business value, if you will, of some of these things is important. So those are the three ways we innovate. I'd say one other thing that, longer term, with one of our core innovations, which is composability, and another of our core innovations, which is our memory-driven computing, we believe that quite frankly, containers are going to be even more important, because you'll be able to hold the containers in these memory-driven computing systems in either DRAM or storage class memory. So you'll be able to spin them up instantly and spin them down instantly. And with the composition capabilities that we have, we can really automate a very significant part of bringing up systems, bringing up applications, and really scaling and moving those applications where they need to be. One of the principles that we are really focused on is moving the compute to the data, as opposed to moving the data to the compute. And the reason for that is if you move the compute to the data, it's a lot easier, a lot simpler, and quite frankly, a lot faster with less resources. And so we really think that this next generation of distributed computing, memory-driven computing, composability is really ripe for these, what we call containers in microseconds, and the ability to do that with this composable tooling that we have.
And when you get to that point, you're not just talking about serverless, you're talking about cloudless. It doesn't matter where the function as a service is being generated, as long as it's at the right performance levels that you require when you require it. So it's very exciting. Before we break off, I wonder, what guidance do you have for organizations to become better prepared to exploit and take advantage of containers, particularly in the context of composability and leveraging a hybrid continuum of deployments? What should companies be doing in order to be getting better prepared to take advantage of containers?
I think, again, for me, it's if you're developing applications, then thinking deeply about agile development principles and developing applications with a microservices bent, very, very important. If you're in IT ops, I think it's all about being able to offer bare metal virtualization and containers as a service, depending on the workload, depending on the requirements of the company. And I think that the thing that I would recommend to companies is don't stand on the sidelines here. Get busy. Get to a proof of concept with containers as a service. We have a lot of expertise here at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. We have a lot of great partners like Docker, and so we are happy to help and engage. We have quite a bit of onboarding and helpful services along the journey. And so jump in, kind of crawl, walk, run through it. There's always some sharp corners on advanced technology, but containers are maturing very quickly. We're here to help our customers on that journey.
All right. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how openness, flexibility, and speed to distributed deployments have been some of the top drivers for the steady growth of container-based solutions. And we've learned how IT operators are now looking to increased automation, built-in intelligence, and robust management as they seek to take more advantage of container-enabled hybrid cloud models. So please join me in thanking our guests who've been here with Mark Linesch, Vice President Technology Strategy in the CTO office and HP Labs at HPE. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Dana. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. And a big thank you to our audience as well for joining us for this sponsored Briefings Direct Voice of the Innovator Hybrid Cloud and Composability Strategies interview. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.